a really unusual sermon, I have to tell you. Normally, when I set out to create a message for Sunday morning, I have some idea what the point is that I want to make. You know, there's something I'm aiming at. And stuff fills in, and it sort of writes itself. This time, I asked myself a question I didn't know the answer to. Okay, and then 3 weeks ago, I gave part one of this, which was the setup with exactly the same scripture lesson, and said, well, I'm not going to tell you what the 153 means, and partly that was because I didn't know yet. So, I've been working hard. It's absolutely fascinating. So I brought you three different explanations for the 153 fishes. You got to admit it's kind of an odd number. I mean, no pun intended, right? So specific. It has to mean something. And it turns out lots of people have opinions about what it means. And I brought you three of them. And as you listen to the different explanations, you might keep in mind that old philosophical adage called Occam's razor, which said, when presented with multiple explanations for something, the simpler one is very often to be preferred. So just keep that in mind. Remember also that we're approaching this kind of as an exercise in imagining that we are living a life in a different time. Okay, we're going back 2,000 years to a time when people really did believe that numbers had special meanings. They weren't just the literal numeric value. There was a whole other layer, and that layer got used by writers and others to convey meaning. So it's a good mental exercise occasionally to imagine being someone else. And this is a particularly interesting one. You will discover in these three different explanations the truth of that adage that what you see is determined by what you're looking for. In other words, the lens that you bring to the problem determines what you think the answer is. Because these answers really are quite different, and they reflect the people who are writing about them. So today we're going to learn how to do gematria. It's Greek over here, guys.
Greek to me, that's what it is. So gematria was the old practice of assigning to letters. Each letter that had a value. And there's a little chart on the back of your bulletin. It's not every church bulletin that has little Greek charts on it. There's a chart with the numbers of the Greek alphabet. See,
A long time ago, they actually had letters before they had numerals.
this is probably not going to work, but I was told. So it was very common to associate a letter with a number with a letter. Starting with alpha is 1, the first 9 digits, and then the multiples of 10, and then the multiples of 100. So I'll show you how gematria works. The first name up here is, you're going to hold, my easel. Okay, here we go. The first, and you have to sort of rotate so everybody can see it. There you go. The first name up here is Athena, right?
Right.
A theta is a TH sound. And the hey at the beginning means the, which they often put in front of name. So this is the Athena. So if we add up the value of the letters in this name, eta is an 8, alpha is a 1, theta is a 9, and there's another eta. Nu is 50, because far along in the alphabet you get a multiple. And alpha is 1, and you get 77. This is significant because Athena, she was the goddess that sprang full grown from the forehead of her father Zeus, remember? She's the virgin.
The virgin goddess.
And 7 was seen by the
Pythagoreans
Pythagoreans
is the virgin number because
it had no primes, so it had no
it
factors.
had no factors.
And it has no
And
multiples.
it has no multiples in the first 10.
So how did they put it?
How did they put it?
Generates nor is
Generates nor is generated.
So it's the
So
virgin.
it's the virgin number.
So of course, 7 is Athena's number. And then you go, how did they get her name to add up to a multiple of 7? Come on, that sort of sounds like a little bit like magic. Well, they had a little help. Without this eta in the front, you would not have a multiple of 7. So they had various little tricks like that. You could add some stuff in or take some stuff out because the word is the only place that you have any flexibility if you want the sum to end up to be a particular number. So we get hey Athena as with a gematria value of 7, which is perfect because 7 is Athena's number. And to the Greeks, this was like, of course, what it meant was there is harmony in the cosmos. It's supposed to come out this way. It made them feel like all's right with the world. That's literally how they approached it. Okay, so that's how gematria works. Not too tricky, except you do have to fiddle with things sometimes if you want to get an answer that, fits the argument you're trying to make. Okay. So the next thing you should know is that certain numbers were seen as special. There was this so-called canon of sacred numbers. And where they came from originally was literally dimensions and distances of the Earth, the Sun, and the Moon. Things like the diameter of the Earth, the distance from the Earth to the Moon, measured in moons or measured in Earths, however you want to do it. So, for example, a number like 1224 is a very special number. You might look at it and go, really? What's so great about that? Well, it turns out if you add the diameter of the Earth and 2 diameters of the Moon, you get 12,240 miles. Zeros are another thing that you can tweak. Biblical math, I'm telling you, Pepe would go nuts with this stuff. You can just drop zeros or add them at will if you need stuff to make sense. So 12,240, let's drop the zero. 1224 is like, it's literally so sacred that John Michel, this esoteric British researcher that I've been reading for weeks now, calls it the number of paradise, because that's the dimension of the New Jerusalem that is described in Revelation. So 1224 is a big friggin' deal, right? It turns out that it's the value by gematria of ichthyos, which is fishes, and also todicton, which is the, you gotta put the in to make it come out right, the net. Both of these words are in the story, which alerted somebody who was aware of gematria and had their gematria receptors turned on, that, whoa, something is going on in this story. We got a whole bunch of occurrences of 1224. That's a big deal. So, the other thing that's important in this story is the name of Jesus, which in Greek looks like this, Jesus. That's a capital Yoda. And it turns out the value by gematria of Jesus is 888. He's called the epitome of eights. In fact, they used to refer to him as the Agduad, which is like some weird name for 8, or just simply the 8. That was his number. Whoa. Okay, watch this magic. 1224, our number of paradise,
divide it by 8. So 8 goes into 12 once with 4 left over. Into 42 goes 5 times with 2 left over. And into 24, we have 3. It's 8 times 153. Whoa, this number has started to show up because in association with Jesus, you get the number of paradise. Okay, now you know where my head has been for the last 3 weeks. So, first we're going to look at John Michel, who is really, this book is totally amazing. It's called The Dimensions of Paradise. And it's where I learned about the thing that I preached on 3 weeks ago with the earth and the moon fitting together inside this, the squared circle thing. It's really quite amazing. So, John Michel's focus in this story is Simon Peter. Okay, he's the one who fishing naked for what reason I have no idea. But throws on his clothes and then dives into the water. You'd think it would be the other way around, but no. Some things we just don't ask about. But when you look at the gematria for his name, Simon Ho Petros, Simon the Rock, is what that means in Greek. That's where the Peter comes from, where the rock on which I will build my church. Right. The value by gematria of Simon Peter's name is 1925. Well, if you happen to draw a circle with circumference 1925, the diameter of that circle would be 1925 divided by pi, right? They knew all about pi. And you get 612.68 blah, blah, blah. That's another rule. You're allowed to round down, even if it looks like that number is closer to 613. No, so we declare that the diameter is 612. Why should that matter? What happens when you double 612? Oh my God, we're back to the number of paradise again. So, turn your bulletin over. That's right, there's a way to deal with that. Okay, on the back, you see that circle with all the little circles in it? The little circles are Peter-sized circles. Imagine that. There are. And that means that there are packed into this larger circle 7 Peter-sized circles, 6 that go around, and 1 more in the middle. Okay, so the big circle represents the boat, and with the 7 disciples in it who were out fishing. Okay, so far so good. And the diameter of this large boat is now twice 612, because it's 2 diameters of the little Peter-sized circles. So the diameter of this boat is 1224. That's a good number. Okay, so Michel interprets the throw the net off the right side of the boat as draw another circle whose center is on the first circle. That represents the net. Okay, and it's the same size, also with a diameter of 1224. And when 2 circles are drawn in such a way that they each pass through the other's center, you get this kind of almond-shaped thing in the middle that's called a Vesica Pisces, the sign of the fish. There are fishes all through this story. Okay, so that's the same shape that's over here with the rhombus and all the little rhombi in there, the Vesica Pisces. And So he draws, he just sort of willy-nilly, I mean, you can do that, you just make up stuff. Draws this rhombus with 16 little ones, and it turns out that the width of each of the little ones is 153. Works out right because of the, the factory we just did. So if you count the 16 little fish and the one big rhombus as the 17th, and notice that 153 is the sum of the first 17 integers, clearly this is a picture of the story. Yeah, okay. That's kind of complicated. He loved, and we're not even done. There's another whole layer that goes on top of it. There's one more diagram in this. It's marvelous. I mean, it's lovely, but it's not intuitively obvious, at least to me. But that's where, and John Michell is seen as like the guru in this field of sacred geometry, that people quote his book all through this. Those of you who have, so that's the first explanation, is the 153 is, it's the other number you need besides Jesus to get to paradise, is basically the way he would say it. The second explanation comes from a British mathematician named S.P. Laurie, who is the one who wrote the book about the Thomas Code. I'm sorry Roy isn't here because Roy loves the Thomas Code. It's the way we saw Thomas the first time. It's like this collection of 114 in that version, 114 separate little sayings. And the meditation group read through it, one saying a week, and we would just ponder it. And they didn't really seem to have much to do with each other, and that was fine. Laurie has discovered an internal structure. If you swap a couple things here and there, he's got this whole thing laid out where there are really only 108 logions in groups of 18, and really three big themes. There's searching, there's being troubled, and there's finding. So it's like David's favorite one, if you get the wording right for me, David. Search until you find, and when you find, you will be troubled. And in your trouble, you will be sovereign over all things. Yeah. We don't exactly know what that means either, but it's okay. But that's the theme of this whole code. So Laurie takes on the 153 through the lens of the Thomas Code. Yeah, I know. So the divisions in Thomas, there are 108 altogether in 3 groups of 36 or 6 groups of 18, which are further divided into 3s and 6s. He notices that Jesus is already grilling a fish on the beach when the disciples show up with the 153 in the net. And he somehow, and I'm a little fuzzy on this, identifies that fish that Jesus is already cooking with 18. And then he notices that the sum of the other divisions, sizes in the Thomas Code is 153. Remember what I said about Occam's razor? Yeah. Yes, that is true, but yeah. And he's connected it to the feeding stories in Mark and Luke. And he doesn't mention Simon Peter at all. Okay, so that's 2 different versions. But the last one is really interesting. The last source of this, person who's written a great deal about it, is Margaret Starbird. Now, I don't know if you guys are run into her. She writes mostly about Marinang. She's the author of Woman with the Alabaster Jar, which is back in the early 90s, one of the first really researched books about Mary Magdalene and her role in the Jesus story and what's happened to her since then. And I got something in my eye. But this book, Magdalene's Lost Legacy, she deals specifically with the 153 fishes. So she met John Michelle in person back in the early 90s. And she asked him if he'd ever done gematria around Mary Magdalene. And he said no. I mean, it's sort of like if you're approaching the whole gospel without any preconception, Mary Magdalene is kind of a bit player. I mean, she shows up here and there, and yeah, she's at the tomb, you know, to be the first to see the risen Christ, but really, there's not that much material about her. So, lots of people are just kind of glossed over. If you focus on Mary Magdalene,
your story gets
much more. It's larger, really quite significant in the Jesus story. So, Starter is asking John Michelle, have you ever done gematria around Mary Magdalene?
He said no. Well, why don't you do it? Doing gematria is not that hard. Find all the words and phrases
in the original Greek that have to do with the topic you're interested in, and you do all these calculations, and you look for ones that land on important numbers, and you say, I wonder what that means. Okay, so she starts in exactly the same place that you or I would, with Mary Magdalene's name, right? I mean, that's like the first obvious thing to do. So we're going to, Gina, that's brilliant.
No, yeah,
The teacher, think of this, she hung it from the hook. We're arguing all day.
Okay. All right, so get your chart out, because we're going to do this one together, all right?
Okay.
Here we go. This is Hey Magdalene. Okay, so Ada is that 8? 8. All right. How about mu?
40.
14? 40. 40 because mu was a 50. Yeah. Alpha is 1. Alpha, beta, gamma must be 3, and delta is 4. Here's another alpha. Okay, what's lambda?
Lambda is 30.
30. 8 is 8. Nu must be 50.
Nu is 50.
And 8 is 8. All right, so we're going to add this up. 8, 48, 49, 52, 56, 57, 87, 95, 145,
153.
about fell off. That's the Magdalene's number. Oh my goodness. Forget all the circles and the rhombuses and all the rest of it. Whoa.
Anyway, yeah.
So she goes back to the thing we looked at before, where 1224 is 8 times 153. Remember now that
These people who are big into the esoteric stuff are also big into astrology. We think astrology is kind of a nice pastime now, but 2,000 years ago, it was serious business. And just as now is the dawning of the age of, 2,000 years ago, it was the dawning of the age of Pisces. Pisces is the sign of the fish. In Starbird's interpretation of this story, 8 stands for the new day. Resurrection happened on the day after the Sabbath. It was the 8th day. It was the new day. I mean, according to her, that's why baptismal fonts are octagonal. Because baptism is a sign of moving into the new day. And that's what 8 meant.
This is,
Right.
I know, this is the new day of the fishes, the 153 fishes. It is also using the city, the New Jerusalem as described in Revelation. It is the city of paradise meant to be headed by Jesus and Magdalene in partnership. Well, how's that for a story that the church actually didn't want you to hear?
Wow. Wow. Yeah. It's very interesting. It so depends on the lens you use to look at it. There's nothing wrong with John Michel's interpretation, because Simon Peter is a big piece of that story. But wow, you get this totally other picture. Remember that the Gnostics, and John is the most mystical of the 4 Gospels. The first 3 are called the Synoptics because they kind of they tell a similar story, and John's is just a little different. He's got like other stuff in there. Over the years, John has become one of the most loved of the 4 Gospels, and certainly one of the most quoted. I'm very tempted, although we'll see if I can stick with this. Advent is coming up in a couple of weeks, and this year I drew the last Sunday of Advent as my preaching Sunday, and so the topic is love, right? The whole thing about Jesus and Mary Magdalene in partnership, which was so different from the patriarchy of the time, and frankly the patriarchy still, and why that's so important, why the way of love matters so much. Because neither extreme of patriarchy or matriarchy is sustainable. I mean, you could say, oh yeah, but we've had it for thousands of years. But, oh yeah, look what we've done to the earth. We can't continue like this.
and part of it
is this thought that's fixed in everybody's mind that patriarchy is the natural state of things. This is a statement that's very, very different, and it says love is the most important thing, and that you need to it's a partnership between male and female. It's not domination by one or the other. So I'm thinking about exploring that some more in a few weeks. We'll see if I have the nerve to do that. Right in the middle of Advent, preach a Mary Magdalene sermon. Whoa. Anyway, that's Margaret Starbird's interpretation of the 153, which is actually kind of cool. Okay, so pick your answer. You can have whichever one you like. Denise and Gina did this amazing altar up here. I get a chance to see it. It's got fishes and numbers and the whole thing. Okay, that's all I have to say.